Hello, colleagues. I offer a brief introduction to the lecture on the conservative revolution and Carl Schmitt's political philosophy. Political science scholars consider Carl Schmitt's writing as a part of the intellectual legacy of the conservative revolution. Conservative revolution is a specific ideological way of thinking about the state and society. Just think, it is the combination of conservatism and revolution. What an unusual mix of saving and destroying traditions, isn't it? Let's try to figure it out. This political way of thinking arose in the early 20th century in Germany, and it was the reaction to the result of the First World War and the formation of so-called Weimar Republic. The term conservative revolution belongs to Friedrich Engels, and its original meaning is unrelated to our subject at hand. It was Armin Mohler first used the term conservative revolution in the actual meaning. Please note that happened in 1949, so it happened after the Second World War. Today it would be more accurate to describe the conservative revolution as early German neoconservatism. So, the conservative revolution had no name of its own. It wasn't a political party, and it didn't have a common ideological core. Therefore, the conservative revolution didn't have the common principles like, for example, classical conservatism. So, conservative revolution, so to speak, is a channel for the stream of special thoughts and ideas. This channel was surrounded on the left side by communists, and on the right it's fenced by National Socialism ideology. At the same time, this channel directed the stream of ideas, bypassing liberalism and Christian democratic movement. This bizarre stream of thoughts, in fact, shaped the mosaic of ideas. So, the conservative revolution was something that remained in the spectrum of political ideas in Germany at that time, after the exclusion from this spectrum communism, Nazism, Christian Democrats, and especially liberalism. From the political sociology point of view, the conservative revolution referred to fragmented right-wing groups that had been radicalized in one way or another. Armin Mohler identified at least 5 separate groups. I'm talking about his famous book, The Conservative Revolution in Germany, 1918-1932. Well, from the history of political thought point of view, conservative revolution is the criticism of political rationalism, parliamentarism, liberal democracy, public law, the denial of social equality and individualism. Conservative revolutionaries appealed upon traditional virtue and historical narrative, emphasized the importance of culture, heritage, national identity rooted in organic social structures, mystic tonic geist, and non-market forms of nationalism. They romanticize the leader and elite, and they dream about reviving their pre-modern irrational folk spirit. In overall, they are totally disappointed with their political forms of modernity. So far, all these are typical for conservatism. On the one hand. But on the other hand, conservative revolutionaries envisioned and conceived the project of the new social order. And this is particularly a key factor for the identification of this way of political thinking. Let's note, classical conservatism never proposed and developed project for the future social order. Classical conservatism never creates a utopia. Future-oriented societal projects are typically characteristic of liberalism, while communists employ mostly utopias as their primary tools. But precisely because conservative revolutionaries understood that there was nothing left to defend, because the past was gone forever and the traditions irreversibly lost. That's why they need utopias of revival. So, it is the ideas of future-oriented utopic projects that transform conservatives into revolutionaries. Or we could say that a utopian type of thinking is taking the conservatives back to their shared with the socialist roots. I'm talking about ideological romanticism roots. For example, Prussian socialism has been proposed as an alternative to international Marxism, or, for instance, the concept of the ethnic tribal states against their anarchist principles of class struggle. Well, all these ideas were reflected in the books of the conservative revolutionaries, in the books of Oswald Spengler, Arthur van den Broek, Ernst Jünger, Edgar Jung, and of course Carl Schmitt. And now, what is our primary interest in Carl Schmitt's work? Carl Schmitt is best known for the so-called the concept of the political. Schmitt claims that his definition of politics was so clear, crystal clear, that it could be served as the scientific concept. This means that if we pronounce his definition of political, it expresses the fundamental feature of the class of phenomena. In our case, politics is such class. If it's truly express the essence of the certain independent field of phenomena, then this means it indicates that political essence is free from influence of their classes of other classes of phenomena, like economic, morality, or, for example, aesthetics. Above all, their political essence must prove resistance to the pressure of historical change. To show that the essence of politics does not change in time, it is necessary to present specific political history and show that the political essence has always remained unchanged. However, history is an academic discipline, possesses its own unique essence. It endures and paces historical narration across generations of time. History is the record about someone or something. Therefore, historical narration accurately disclosing the meaning, purpose, and principles of historical movement. What I want to say that some kind of philosophy of history is necessary when narrating or interpreting historical events. I don't address now how typical common this way of thinking in both liberalism and communism. The philosophy of history should immediately scare off any classical conservative. Nonetheless, Carl Schmitt advanced this step out from conservative perspective and articulate his personal philosophy of history, which he named political theology. Carl Schmitt, like most German historians do, he separates the antiquity of mankind and Germans' national history. At the beginning of the national history, medieval Christianity initially hindered the rise of the modern German state, but then theological influence declined, theology faded from the stage of political history. It turns out that German political history can be seen as a process of secularization. It evolving from theological perspectives to deism and ultimately to atheism. Let's note, political theology examines how the German state changes as society becomes more secular. Carl Schmitt formulated in his book the methodological imperative of political theology, that the central concepts of modern state theory are all secularized theological concepts. In accordance with that, this political history has come a long way, only evolving considerably from absolute monarchy to democracy. The history of modernity is what liberals call political progress, and what conservative revolutionaries do not agree with. Absolute monarchy was traditionally legitimized exclusively through theological Bible principles, whereas democracy derives its legitimacy from secular public law, and specifically the Constitution. So, secularization, while involving a minimal theological consideration, at the same time represent a highly significant political development. And one more. Carl Schmitt directly points out that secularization was an expression of the political interest of liberalism. Liberalism aimed to establish democracy, leading to the Weimar Republic. Liberals carefully hid the political nature of their power behind the screen of the legal principles, rule of law. But the political essence is so strong that it cannot be completely hidden. The political nature can't conceal entirely. Carl Schmitt recommends the thorough examination of the Constitution, and then it will not be difficult to see that the political essence is manifested in authority granted to the highest state official to declare a state emergency. The legal authority to abolish the Constitution prompts us to consider what is inherently political. What is the fundamental characteristic that defines politics itself? Of course, we will all know that Carl Schmitt argued that all political motives and actions are easily reduced to extreme forms of social unity and disunity. Exactly. Association and dissociation of people point to the ultimate meaning of politics, which is to distinguish between friends and enemies, friends and foes. Carl Schmitt believed that his concept of the political reflect both in political practice and theory of politics. And from this position, Carl Schmitt entered perhaps in the most interesting polemic in the history of public law. It is the dispute about the guarantor of constitution with well-known Austrian constitutionalist Hans Kelsen. If you are interested in Carl Schmitt's political philosophy, then I'm pleased to offer you a course. A link to it in the description. Thanks for your attention.